Believe it or not, the Volvo XC90 launched in our market about 8 years ago. And more notably, it was actually one of the very first luxury cars that we ever reviewed on the channel. Now, in that time, lots of other cars have come and gone. The X5 has progressed about 2 generations, so has the Mercedes-Benz GLE. Audi has died and then come back again, but the XC90 remains the same. Except it isn't, because as a part of a raft of new updates, Volvo assures that this XC90 is exactly what you need in 2024 with exactly the same car that they launched almost a decade ago. My name is Aiman Abdullah, this is Malaysian Motoring, this is our review of the 2024 Volvo XC90 T8 Ultimate. Now, the basic architecture of the XC90 hasn't changed, which means that this, the T8, is a plug-in hybrid. Up front, you will find a 2-litre turbocharged and supercharged petrol engine, mated to an 8-speed automatic gearbox, as well as an electric motor driving the rear wheels. So while the T8 is an all-wheel drive Volvo, the engine only powers the front wheels because the rear wheels are powered by the electric motor. Now, what has changed is a little bit of tuning. So this engine up front has been lightly revised, according to Volvo, in order to make its operation even smoother than before. But more importantly, the electric motor and the battery feeding it have also been updated. The battery is now 18.5-ish kilowatt hours, which is significantly larger than it was before. And now the Volvo XC90 is rated for up to 70 kilometers on a single charge. Although in the real world, you're more likely to see between 62 to 65 kilometers on a single charge. The electric motor has also been updated, so now it's even more powerful than before, which is why peak torque in this car is in excess of 700 Newton meters of torque. This is also why this massive behemoth of a thing can go from 0 to 100 in just 5.3 seconds. Now, about 5 years ago, Volvo facelifted the XC90, which means at the front there are no visual changes from what we've seen before, which means you still get the full LED lights up here, replete with the Thor's Hammer daytime running light signature. These lights are also matrix LED units, which means that they can adjust the beam to ensure that you can use full beam without blinding other road users. The grille also has this lovely concave sort of look to it, which certainly looks a lot more aggressive, gives it a shark-like sort of nose. And the biggest update, however, which also came about around the time of the facelift, is that the Volvo iron mark now lines up with the bar that goes across. It's just nicer, believe me. Now, down the side, again, there are no real changes for the 2024 model year because a lot of the changes, the visual changes at least, came about last year, which means you get 20-inch alloy wheels with a diamond cut finish on the outside and black inserts, which I think look really, really good. And this particular car rides on Michelin Pilot Sport 4 for SUVs. Now, it's a very specific unit because it's an SUV and also because the XC90 is quite heavy. Now, going on to the visual changes on the side or lack thereof, I'm sure that there are many of you wondering why it is that Volvo doesn't more heavily facelift their vehicles. And I'd argue that it's because their designs are generally quite timeless. When the XC90 first came out, many people marveled at this sort of very minimalist, very elegant design, and a lot of us mentioned that it does look quite timeless, which is clearly proven with this, because 8 years on, this is still a very handsome looking SUV. And that same opinion extends to the rear because, again, only very minor changes were made to the rear bumper and stuff like that about 4 years ago because this car still looks very good. The only real change sort of came a little bit later than that when they changed the badging. It used to just be referred to as the T8, now it's called the T8 all-wheel drive Recharge, whereas the trim level went from Inscription when it was first introduced to Ultimate, which is what it is now. Now, what hasn't changed is actually the practicality, because behind this massive tailgate, you will find a good amount of space. Now, as you can see, I actually have not only the tonneau cover in place, but also the boot divider. This is to ensure that smaller items don't roll around, but without this in place, Now this is admittedly with the third row down, which means this is the maximum amount of cargo room if you want 4 or 5 passengers in place. But even with the third row up, you still have a good amount of space in here, bigger than some hatchbacks. And of course, underneath this false floor, you will find just enough space for the cables. And of course, if you have an elderly dog, you can also make the car kneel in order to improve ingress and egress. See? Now, one of the significant updates for the 2024 model year actually comes in terms of charging, because in addition to the larger battery, initially the XC90 could only charge up to 3.7 kilowatts. However, now it can AC charge it up to 6.6. Now, Volvo says that this reduces the charge time from dead to full to about 3 hours, where previously it was about 5 hours. This does mean that this should make the XC90 far more usable for those who actually plug in their cars and therefore reap the massive benefits of using the plug-in hybrid powertrain, which we will get onto a little bit later. Now, on the inside of the XC90, unfortunately, there is no sunglasses holder. Now, the interior of this car is broadly similar to what we saw when the car was first introduced, which was kind of a good thing, but also a bad thing. The good thing is this interior was always very pleasant to look at and very intuitive to interact with. And so you still have physical buttons, thank God, to control the majority of your functions, especially like things like the advanced driver assist systems and so on. But everything else has been minimized to a nice balance between tactility and functionality, as well as simplicity. So for example, you get a row of buttons here to control things like your volume, changing tracks, your rear defroster and so on, and that's very nice. Down here you get your start-stop knob, as well as your crystal gear selector, as well as your handbrake buttons, and you get some more buttons on this side for your fuel filler cap as well as your boot. And aside from that, everything else in here is all in the screen, which is good and bad. So firstly, the HVAC controls now live in the screen, but mercifully there is a little panel on the bottom which never moves, and that allows you to adjust things like your temperature as well as the ventilation for the 2 front seats. If you want anything else, however, you have to go in the screen. This also includes, very infuriatingly, changing the drive modes. Now, I mentioned this because this being a plug-in hybrid, obviously there are lots of drive modes that you want to play with. So for example, when you're on the motorway, you may want the vehicle to charge the battery rather than use it all up while you're driving at higher speed, or to hold that charge until you arrive at a city center where the electric motor would be more efficient than running the petrol engine. But unfortunately, all of that is within the screen, and the operation of which requires at least 2 button presses before you even get into the menu that you're looking for, which again I find very irritating, because if that was just a button, as it used to be on some Volvos of similar age, it would have been a lot easier. Now, the other problem is this screen and this screen both run Google Automotive, not Android Auto. This car does come with wireless Apple CarPlay, or potentially wired, I think, but the system itself is operated by Google. As a result, you do not get Android Auto because all of your apps are integrated into the screen and it runs off of a separate SIM card dedicated to the car. Now, I have complained about this in the past and I will reiterate it again. The problem with doing this is by not having Android Auto, it means that you need to have a separate SIM card. Now, while Volvo Car Malaysia will sell you the car with a 5-year digital services subscription, after that, it is not clear exactly how that expense works. On top of that, because it's not Android Auto, it does mean that when I plug my phone in, the car is no longer reading my messages. I can no longer respond to them on the go. A lot of the functionality that I enjoy with Android Auto is now gone. So on top of losing certain functionality, I now also have to pay for a subscription to use all of these services. All of this in exchange for an SOS button and the ability to precondition my car. That's not really that big of a deal. On top of that, it also means that the screen up ahead of me now uses a Google interface rather than one from Volvo, which means that this dial setup is very generic. Yes, the fonts are very Volvo, but everything else is very Google. As we move into an age where cars will be differentiated by their user experience, removing the Volvo-ness from this experience does mean that some customers who like the Volvo brand experience will now no longer have it because it's all just run by Google. Now, mercifully, the heads-up display is at least a Volvo item, although the amount of information displayed in that heads-up display is very limited, which again I find very irritating because if it's just the speed, then I don't really need it. Now, mercifully, other things in this car are still quite nice. So you still get a lot of this unvarnished wood. You get a lovely ambient lighting system without any sort of color changing whatever, because you don't need it. And in exchange, you just get this lovely sort of warm white glow from certain aspects of the car. It just looks fantastic. The other thing that looks fantastic are these seats. Now, Volvo makes some of the best seats in the car industry, and that remains with the XC90. It's still done up in Napa leather, although unfortunately it's only available in black. But the front seats now come with heating and ventilation, like I mentioned earlier, as well as 3-stage memory for both the front passenger as well as the driver. You get electrically adjustable lower thigh support, as well as side supports and bolster, a sort of rear lumbar, which means everything in here just works really well. You get a lot of adjustment in the steering wheel, you get a great view out of the wing mirrors. Everything is just nice. It's very Volvo in here, which is good. Now, because the Volvo XC90 is such a large car, naturally there is an abundance of space in here. With the front seat set in my driving position of about 170 centimeters, I have acres of knee room and a good amount of headroom despite the panoramic sunroof and the sun blind, which rolls all the way to just above my head, which means that life back here is quite nice. Now, these 3 seats can actually be slid individually, so if I want to make more room for the third row, I can push this all the way to the front, and even then I still have a good amount of knee room nonetheless. On top of that, the backrests in these cars are also adjustable from a slightly more reclined angle like this to something a bit more upright. And it is worth noting that when you do that, it actually adjusts the seat base as well to ensure that you have very good under-thigh support. Now, being a Volvo, this car is naturally made for families, which is why you will find there are a lot of features in here that are designed for that. For example, the 4-zone climate control actually has a separate set of functions or controls here in the center console, which means you can adjust your temperature as well as your fan speed. You also get air conditioning blowers not just in the middle for your crotch, but also here on the B pillars to ensure that you actually have air conditioning to your face. Volvo is very keen to point out they were one of the first manufacturers in the world to do this, to ensure optimum comfort in the back. You also get naturally ISOFIX mounts on these outer seats, but you also get a built-in booster seat here in the middle should you have a slightly older child, and therefore they'll be a bit safer sat here. You get USB ports, or rather 2 USB ports back here, and everything in here is quite good. And of course, if you have children, you would also want to utilize the built-in sun blinds to block them from UV rays. Now, life here is very comfortable indeed, and in terms of quality, everything is exactly as you'd expect, with the same stitching and lovely leather lining the majority of the doors, and everything that you touch is lovely and soft touch and nice and solid. On top of that, you have these lovely Bowers & Wilkins speaker grills that you get only on the Ultimate model, because it's the only one that gets this fantastic sound system. Now, life in the third row is actually not as bad as you might think. While a lot of SUVs like these are 5+2s, the XC90, despite offering a good amount of boot space, can actually have a couple of adults in the third row. I wouldn't advise putting them there for too long, but it is technically possible, and when you are sat back there, you still have amenities like your own air conditioning vents, as well as some cup holders and so on, which means that life back there is still quite comfortable. Now, the thing about the XC90 is that it was also the first Volvo to introduce the 2-litre 4-cylinder capacity limit, which Volvo at the time said they managed to augment with this electrified powertrain, meaning that it is still as powerful as you'll ever need. Let's get back in the driver's seat to find out if 8 years on, they're lying. Well, no. The thing about the XC90, and most Volvos really, is that it is never about athleticism or driving prowess or dynamic capabilities. Volvos are all about that slow, calm, serene driving experience. And so that updated powertrain lends itself to that. So as I mentioned earlier, the larger 18 and a bit kilowatt-hour battery means that this car now has an official quoted range of about 70 kilometers on the charge. Although in our testing, we've seen more between 62 to 65 kilometers on a full charge, which is still very commendable and close enough to the targeted, or rather the quoted range. Now, when that range runs out, obviously you still have the 2-litre 4-cylinder up front. And when you put all of that together, this is still a very, very powerful machine. Although, again, it's nice to have all that performance, but you're never really going to use it. The reality of the XC90 is that from the moment you get in it, it just sort of lends this air of waftiness. All you want to do is just gently cruise to wherever it is that you're going, then gently cruise home again. This is not about speeding, it's not about tailgating. You very rarely make full use of the performance because there's no real need for it anyway. And on top of that, when the car is fully charged, you will find yourself using the electric power most of the time because that's just the most pleasant way to drive it, and because the electric mobility is enough to keep this car up to 120, 130 kilometers an hour if need be. So for the last 400 kilometers I've driven this car, I have been charging this car on a regular basis to top up the battery, although there have been occasions, because I don't have a wall box, that this car hasn't been able to charge all the way to full. It's only been able to get to about 70-80% thereabouts. And then I sort of just went about my business with the little bit of battery that I had in it. And I have to say, even when driving this car through a whole day without any electric power at all, because I couldn't charge the car, even then this car has remained commendably efficient. As I'm on the way to drop this car off now, the official quoted fuel consumption is 3.4 liters per 100 kilometers, and you will struggle to get numbers like that out of anything with a bigger engine or with any other kind of powertrain. And so this does make the XC90 a very appealing package, because it means that when you need it, there is performance available, and then when you don't need it, you just pot about in electric mode. This is essentially, to me, a teaser of what the Volvo EX90, the full-size 3-row SUV, fully electric that's coming in Q4 this year, must be like, and so far, so good. But of course, when you're looking at a plug-in hybrid, naturally it is because you've decided that an electric vehicle might not quite fit your use patterns. And so you would have looked at a vehicle like the Kia EV9 and thought, yeah, that doesn't really quite work for me. I would still like the reassurance of a petrol-powered engine. And I have to say that when you use the petrol-powered engine in this car, it is still a very pleasant experience, because the engine is very far away and it lives behind a whole bunch of sound deadening. So it's very, very isolated from the cabin. And because it chimes in and out ever so smoothly, you barely realize when the engine switches on and switches off, and the transition between electric power to combustion power is done also very, very smoothly, so it's imperceptible for the most part. And because of the way the electric motor and electric hybrid system works in this car, it also means that the performance is pretty much hard to beat, really. The electric motor has this thing about kicking in where the petrol engine might sort of have a bit of a slump. For example, it eliminates turbo lag, it creates a much more immediate response. And so the XC90 always feels very eager to jump off the line. Although saying jump off the line in a large 3-row SUV does seem quite comical now that I'm hearing it come out of my mouth. But that is just the way it is. This car is incredibly powerful, and it doesn't shy away from using that power whenever you need it. But when you don't, when you're just going about your day, relaxing, and being all chill about life, then the XC90 chills out just fine too. This car is impressively refined. It's just a very positive place to be. Sat in here, in terms of road noise, there is a little, and in terms of wind noise, there is also a little, but it only starts to creep in north of the national speed limit, so you don't really notice it that much. But when you're driving about in town like I am now, at urban speeds, there's almost no noise at all. Of course, when you're driving on electric mode, it gets even quieter still. All the glass in this car is acoustic, which means that it blocks out more sound from getting into the cabin to interrupt your serenity. So overall, everything in this car is just amazingly positive. And then when you're out on the motorway, when the petrol engine kicks in, you have that reassurance of the performance available should you need to climb up hills or overtake something with urgency or whatever. And so it just creates a very pleasant atmosphere. On top of that, when you are driving this car, regardless of whether or not it's in town or stuck in traffic, you'll appreciate the Volvo IntelliSafe Active Safety Suite of safety systems. Now, IntelliSafe is a relatively mature system in the sense that it's come about many, many times. There have been many, many iterations, been updated many, many times. And as a result, it means that this system executes what it needs to quite flawlessly. So when you're driving in town, like I am now, you tend to just switch on the pilot assist and let the car do the majority of the work. And although this car doesn't have retina scanners and eye trackers and whatever, it just works really well. The radar and camera system mean that the car centers itself very well. It adapts to the situation very well. It adjusts to sudden lane merges and so on pretty adeptly. It manages the speed, it picks up and slows down in a very natural and very linear fashion. and nothing interrupts the serenity of this driving experience. Now, there are a few things that I would like to point out about the XC90 because not everything in this car is quite perfect. The biggest bugbear, of course, lies with Google Automotive, which I already bleated on, and so I'll just leave that there. The other issue I have with this is the fact that although this ADAS system has gone through many iterations and is very mature and is very reliable and ranks among the very best in the industry, I will note that it hasn't been fully calibrated for right-hand drive markets. I mention this because when the vehicle centers itself in the lane, it likes to hug the left side of the lane rather than the right. Now, in left-hand drive markets, drivers will tend to hug the left side of the lane as to leave the majority of space on the right side for faster-moving vehicles as well as bikes that might be lane splitting and so on. But unfortunately, in the Volvo, it also likes to hug the left side of the lane. So when you're stuck in the overtaking lane on the motorway, you will find yourself overtaking vehicles to the left a little bit closer than you might necessarily be comfortable with. This, of course, can be overridden because, as with all Volvos, you can just move the steering wheel and adjust itself very naturally. It doesn't cancel the system altogether. And so it is at least easy to live with, and it's easy to adjust yourself and adapt yourself to the system. But it's just that it would have been nice if it didn't do that, especially if it was given the fact that this is a Volvo. This is a car company that's supposed to know what it's doing. But that aside, and that really is a very minor niggle, the XC90 is still as flawless in 2024 as it was when it came out in our market back in, 2016, 2017? This is a fantastic car. It drives so smoothly, it is so comfortable, it's incredibly efficient, and if you ask me, if you're looking for a large 7-seater SUV that provides a blend of performance and efficiency, you cannot go wrong in a Volvo XC90. However, if you're buying your large SUV on the basis that you're going to be using it 99% of time in town and traveling longer distances isn't really something that you do, then check out the Kia EV9, because not only is that larger and therefore more comfortable for passengers, it also is fully electric, which means that running it in town is far more efficient than wasting fuel in a petrol or using the relatively small battery that you get in a plug-in hybrid like this. And if you think that plug-in hybrid usability is something that you want, but you're worried that this 2-liter engine might get a bit thirsty on the motorway, which it can at times, then you may be better served by the new BMW X5, which instead of a 2-liter 4-cylinder runs a 3-liter straight 6, which means that out on the motorway, not only will it be able to maintain speed without really getting or falling out of puff, it will also be able to recharge the battery quite convincingly, as we tested in the BMW 740LE previous generation. But if you want what seems to me like the SUV that can do everything, then the Volvo XC90 really is it. This is a fantastic car, even for someone like me who enjoys enthusiastic driving from time to time. The act of getting into a vehicle like the XC90 is just so pleasant. At the end of every day when you're tired and worn out, the XC90 welcomes you like your living room would. And sitting in these chairs, they're like plush armchairs, it's just so serene. In any case, that's been our review of the 2024 Volvo XC90 T8 Ultimate. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, hit the little bell icon to be notified every time we make a new upload. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. All the links are in the description below. Thank you so much for watching. We'll catch you in the next one. Take care, stay safe, and jangan bodoh.